La réunion aujourd'hui, c'est de...
Welcome to the meeting of our meeting. That is 28th of February. The proceedings will be televised on our parliamentary station, and we will be looking at the individual speaker who is presenting rather than the entire gallery. So welcome to the 7th meeting of the House of Commons Standing Committee of Agriculture and Agri-Food. And just a reminder, screenshots or taking photos of the screen is not permitted.
See a good crowd here in person. That's been a rarity over the last year or so. But just a reminder of course, the health protocols that we're all accustomed to. Please keep that top of mind. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, January 31st, 2022, the committee is resuming its study of the agriculture and agri-food supply chain. I would now like to welcome our witnesses for our first panel. And so with us today on the teleconference is Jennifer Wright, who is the Acting Executive Director and Director of Operations, Programs and Partnerships with the Canadian Agricultural Human Resource Council. Welcome. From the Canadian Horticulture Council, we have Rebecca Lee, who is the Executive Director, and Quinton Woods, who serves as the Chair of Trade and Marketing Working Group. And from the Department of Industry, we have Murad Al-Khatib, who is the Chair of the Economic Strategy Table for Agri-Food. You're going to have up to 5 minutes, but colleagues, obviously we did not sit last week, and I just think it's important that we put on the record. Obviously, we saw terrible events with Russia invading Ukraine, and I know I speak on behalf of all members of this committee that we denounce and condemn this egregious violation of international law, and the images that we've seen have been horrific. Our thoughts and prayers are with all Ukrainians and those who are fighting for freedom. I know our work as parliamentarians will extend beyond thoughts and prayers to concrete action, as we've already seen, and I know this will be a top priority for all of us as members of Parliament and elected officials in the days ahead. I think it's a reminder that democracy is not a given, freedom is not a given, and perhaps a reminder, a solemn one today, as we undertake our important work as parliamentarians. So I just wanted to say that. I know I speak for all the folks on this committee and elsewise. So, with that said, I'd now like to invite Ms. Wright to make an opening statement of 5 minutes, and then we'll follow by Ms. Lee and Mr. Al-Khatib. So, Ms. Wright, over to you for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to participate in the Standing Committee study. I'm Jennifer Wright, the Acting Executive Director and Director of Research, Programs and Partnerships at the Canadian Agricultural Human Resource Council. My comments today will focus on the pervasive labour shortage currently being experienced in Canadian agriculture and what we can do together to address this. The workforce needs of Canada's agriculture industry is something that CARC has been examining for more than 15 years. It is clear that the industry cannot continue to produce healthy, safe, and affordable food for Canadians and for global consumers without an adequate supply of agriculture workers. The COVID pandemic has put an even greater spotlight on the issue and confirmed that there is no more time to waste. We must work together toward longer-term and systemic solutions to the persistent labor shortages the agriculture industry is facing. CARC's labor market research indicates job vacancies are exceptionally higher in agriculture compared to other industries, resulting in close to $3 billion in lost revenues in 2018. The inability for farmers to fill all of their vacant positions with either Canadian or foreign workers makes the business of food production in Canada very difficult. International workers come to Canada to work on farms and fill positions when Canadians can't be found. Although approximately 60,000 foreign workers are brought in each year, thousands of vacancies still remain, with 16,500 vacancies in 2018. In fact, workforce shortages are doubling every 10 years, with a forecasted total labor gap of 123,000 by 2029. Businesses that are unable to fill vacancies face high production losses, delayed expansion plans, and some are foregoing operations altogether. Securing a full team of workers is challenging for farm businesses at any time. It is especially challenging during a pandemic. CARC's research on the impacts of COVID on the sector confirmed significant impacts on farm operations. including production delays, overtime costs, and delayed or canceled investment or expansion. While Canada's agriculture employers are actively trying new and creative ways to find and keep more of their workers, the scope of the problem is significant. At present, the sector is on an unsustainable path with a growing number of jobs going unfilled. To address the myriad of challenges facing the agriculture and food manufacturing sector, government departments, educational institutions, sector associations, and other stakeholders will need to work together. Now is the time to ensure the food production system continues to be resilient through COVID and beyond, and is well positioned to overcome the persistent labor shortages that have been limiting growth. We urgently need an national agriculture and food manufacturing labor strategy, as has been done in other jurisdictions such as Australia. In spring 2021, CARC, along with our partners, the Canadian Federation of Agriculture and Food and Beverage Canada, commenced the development of a national workforce strategy for agriculture and food manufacturing, with the goal to bring stakeholders together to collaborate and develop an actionable roadmap to address the increasing labor shortage. There are over 50 industry organizations contributing to this process. This strategy identifies short, medium, and long-term actions in the areas of skills development, automation and technology, people and workplace culture, perceptions of the industry, and immigration and foreign workers. Overarching themes include equity, diversity, and inclusion, infrastructure, data and competitiveness, and profitability. We are also engaging CARC's Indigenous Advisory Committee to help inform this process. CARC is pleased that both the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food and Minister of Employment, Workforce Development, and Disability Inclusion have committed to develop an agricultural labor strategy. CARC is looking forward to working with industry, education, and government partners to move this forward. In particular, we encourage the federal government to build on and support the work we've undertaken to date. In summary, COVID has highlighted food is essential to Canadians and workers are essential to food production. Without stabilizing the supply of workers and getting the right people with the right skills into agriculture jobs, our industry will not thrive. Now is the time to ensure the food production system stays operational and is well positioned to overcome the persistent labor shortages that have been impacting the sector and limiting its growth. We can start by working together to develop a labor, agriculture, and food manufacturing workforce strategy for all of Canada. I look forward to questions from the committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wright. We're now going to move to Ms. Lee for 5 minutes. Over to you.
I would actually like to start off with Quinton, if you don't mind, and then then he'll pass it back to me. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Go ahead, Mr. Woods.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the Ag Committee, and thank you for the opportunity to join you today and speak on behalf of growers on the ongoing supply chain disruptions felt by the agriculture and agri-food sectors. My name is Quinton Woods, and I'm the Sales and Plant Operations Manager at Gwillimdale Farms in Bradford, Ontario. I also serve on the Canadian Horticulture Council as the chair of the Trade and Marketing Working Group. The Canadian Horticulture Council, also known as CHC, is an Ottawa-based national association that represents 14,000 fruit and vegetable growers across Canada involved in the production of over 120 different types of crops, with farm gate sales of $5.7 billion in 2020. I would like to begin my comments by saying the supply chain disruptions we're facing today are not new disruptions and existed well before the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. However, with public health challenges in the past 2 years, the public health challenges has exacerbated economic and logistical challenges along the global supply chains. Given the perishability of fruits and vegetables, our growers continue to feel these impacts and work daily to find solutions to ensure consumers in Canada and around the world continue to have access to our safe, healthy, and nutritious products. The increasing cost and delay along the supply chain threaten our food security and long-term economic viability of the fruit and vegetable sector. Some of the challenges our growers face include, but are not limited to, crippling port congestions, delay in container shipping, inconsistent product delivery, persisting labor shortages, and unprecedented increases of input costs. Some of the input costs that we're seeing today are labor. Our labor rates have increased through the roof, and the biggest problem with the labor rates is actually the shortage and lack of access to labor. prices of lumber impacting the availability of pallets, pulp and plastic resin used to make cardboard boxes and plastic packaging, prices of crop protection products. One of the biggest cost increases that we've seen this year is actually the cost of fertilizer, which some growers are facing increases as high as 53%. And lastly, one of the most important and very timely based off of recent events is the availability of trucks and truck drivers. These shortages were there before the COVID-19 pandemic, but with the new introduction of the border measures, it further reduced the supply of available truck drivers to haul our goods across international borders. It is important to note that the costs associated with these disruptions cannot be fully borne by growers like myself, and wherever possible, we will need to pass these on to consumers. Sadly, these increases, which are being felt by the end consumer, are likely to escalate, and most affecting those who can least afford it. Now I'll pass it off to Rebecca Lee for her comments.
Thank you, Quinton, and good morning, members of the committee. My name is Rebecca Lee, and I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Horticultural Council. As you have heard, ongoing supply chain disruptions have had significant impacts on the Canadian fruit and vegetable sector. The growers we represent from across the country, including Quinton, have demonstrated remarkable resilience over the past 2 years to continue providing our communities with fresh, nutritious food sources. But in order for them to continue doing so, we are calling on the federal government to take swift and decisive action to address the deficiencies in our supply chain. We were pleased to see this need acknowledged in the recently convened Supply Chain Summit and through the government's establishment of a national supply chain task force. These challenges are complex and will require the collaboration of multiple ministries, departments, and stakeholders. We believe it is essential for government to work in a multilateral and holistic manner to address these ongoing challenges. In order to ensure the task force is able to bring the necessary players around the table and take meaningful actions to address disruptions, we are requesting the appointment of a supply chain commissioner to lead the group, as have many other industry associations. This would mirror the process undertaken in the United States. The commissioner must be empowered with decision-making authority and prevent the bureaucracy of government from getting in the way of bringing about substantive action. Without doing so, the issues experienced now will create long-lasting impacts to the detriment of all North American economies. These include bankruptcies, legal disputes, industry consolidation, inflation, inaccessible food supplies, among others. Despite all these threats, Canada's agricultural sector has stepped up and continued to provide stable and safe food to Canadian families, which has been critical to maintain.
I apologize. I even gave you a few extra seconds. I'm sorry. I know members will get to ask questions. Mr. El-Khatib, over to you for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to see the committee today. My name is Murad El-Khatib, and I'm here as the chair of the Agri-Food Strategy Council and also as the CEO of AGT Foods based out of Regina. Today, I'm going to bring you some comments with a very specific focus on the Western Canadian cropping system. And I want to start with an acknowledgement that, Canada has been blessed with a very significant agricultural endowment with some of the best and most productive agricultural land in the world, making Canada a world leader in agricultural production and export. For decades, we've been known as the breadbasket of the world. However, in recent years, we've increasingly been known as the first stop on the protein highway. With food, fuel, fertilizer, and feed, Canada has what the world needs and wants, and Canadian agriculture is on the front line providing societal solution to global challenges in protein, food, and renewable fuel supplies. We will be vital to the United Nations FAO's mission that requires the world to produce the same amount of food in the next 40 years as the world produced in the last 10,000 years of civilization to meet the growing population of 10 billion people by 2050. The ag sector with our farmers and farm families, processors and exporters are up to this challenge. We employ sustainable solutions like a 3-crop rotation of canola, nitrogen-fixing pulses, and wheat, and technologies like zero and minimum tillage farm management. We succeed even in an environment of rising fuel prices, carbon policies that increase production and input costs, and other challenges that face our farm families and processors across this country. To continue to succeed, though, we must address risks and uncertainties and future-proof our sector, including stronger competition and changes in consumer demand for quality plant-based proteins, environmental stewardship, and cleaner energy. Labor availability is a major obstacle in agriculture, and one I'm certain you'll have questions about. In an environment where, in a post-COVID environment, there's been a dramatic effect on availability of workers at every level of our industry. Prospective workers have moved on to other positions with increased pay, better benefits, and other advantages, while others have exited the workforce entirely. While there's methods of dealing with labor shortages, such as technology, robotics, automation, labor will continue to be an ongoing challenge, especially as processors make investments in new infrastructure to add capacity to meet the growing consumer demands. With projects like AGT's planned protein extraction facility in Regina, as well as a $360 million canola crushing facility in partnership with Federated Co-op announced last month to produce 1 billion liters of renewable diesel. This is part of a $2 billion agricultural complex announced. The availability of ready, trained, and workforce is of utmost concern. In an agriculture sector, we have always wrestled with transportation-related issues, especially with our cold climate and market-locked nature. Recently, funding options such as the National Trade Corridor Fund replenishment in our budget was a very welcome announcement, and strong leadership, though, is needed, to create transportation policy frameworks to support trade and continue to provide a long-term funding to build capacity, invest in infrastructure, remove bottlenecks, and make supply chain improvements that are critical to maintaining Canada's reputation as a reliable supplier of products. You may know I was on the federally appointed panel in charge of reviewing the Canada Transportation Act, the Emerson Report, that paid special attention to recommendations for the ag industry. And I was also honored to chair the Industry Strategy Council Agriculture Subcommittee with Monique Leroux, where we tabled our report in 2020. Key to that work was rekindling recommendations about long-term infrastructure planning. How can we develop a multimodal strategy in our country if we're planning on election cycles of 2 to 4 years versus 10, 20, and 50-year cycles? So we need to ensure that the economic prosperity of Canadians and the maintenance of our social programs and our way of life is really tied to economic prosperity, and trade infrastructure is very key to that. In our report from the Ag Strategy Table, we provided a number of key recommendations for the ag sector, many of which provide the basis for our discussions with you today at this committee meeting. These included 5 key areas to strengthen the ag food sector, collectively embracing the future-proofing of our ag and food sector by renewing our regulatory system to become more agile, embracing digital innovation to provide safe, traceable, sustainable food, feed, and ingredients. Though this work, we can only lay the groundwork for Agriculture 2.0, it is a generational opportunity that has never been more exciting for our economy. I'll be happy to take questions from the committee on the supply chain challenges, transportation, labor, and skills. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. We're going to get right to questions. We'll start with Mr. Epp for 6 minutes. Over to you, Mr. Epp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witness also for your excellent testimony. I'd like to begin with CARC and Ms. Wright. You mentioned, and I'm going to start with longer-term labor shortages. You mentioned 123,000 jobs short by 2029. Can you put that in context? What percentage of our labor force would that represent?
Thank you for the question. And I don't have the percentage right in front of me, but I would say it is significant, and it does impact the amount of growth that can happen between now and then. Certainly what we've seen over the last decade and continue to hear through COVID is that agriculture producers are not reaching the potential that they can as far as revenue and production. And, some are making decisions not to expand and not to also, maybe even continue forward with their production.
Thank you. I'll take it to, a little bit more short term now. I know you were also involved with the creation of the Emergency Worker Program. Can I ask how, together with other ag organizations, can I ask what the feedback has been on that? I know there was a request to have some changes made by the end of January. We're a month later than that. Can you update the committee on progress?
So that request was actually from the food manufacturing side of the value chain, and CARC was not involved directly with that. So I can't really comment on the progress that's been made. I do know that, certainly from the food manufacturing side of things, it's an essential and a big request that they're looking to move forward.
Okay, thank you. I'll leave with the same question, and I'll flip over to the to Canadian Hort Council. Actually, I will move on to a different question, though, specifically to your supply chain commissioner, taking a whole of government approach. We have heard from CPMA on their perspective. So to Rebecca or to Quinton, what would be kind of the impacts or the problems you're trying to solve with that kind of an approach at the grower level?
Thank you. One of the biggest things we're trying to solve at the grower level is just to have somebody that's in place to be able to make the decisions to streamline the supply chain systems and start easing some of the challenges that we're facing on grower level. We have growers that are starting to question whether they're going to continue producing food for our country, and it's becoming a very difficult environment to work in.
Thanks. Fertilizer was mentioned, and I want to come at it from two perspectives. One is obviously the cost, but the other is also the discussions regarding a 30% decrease over time with greenhouse gas emissions, potentially up to a 20% cut in application rates or even more. Can you comment on the effect, particularly on horticultural crops? That's my own background, so I'm aware that often horticultural crops are higher users of nitrogen. What would be the impacts of such a proposal or policy direction?
Thank you. The direct impacts that we would face in the horticulture sector would be decreased production. We require the fertilizers that the fertilizer usage that we're currently using is all done by specific soil testing, ensuring that we are applying correct rates of fertilizer applications onto the ground. So as we start easing the rates of fertilizers, we would then decrease our production.
Thank you. Related still to horticulture, if I can, noticing that the supplemental estimates include over $350,000 to begin to fund another layer of oversight with Pest Management Regulatory Agency. I know horticulture uses a lot of niche crop protection products. So can you comment on the availability and the potential lack of availability, particularly vis-a-vis our competitiveness with our number one competitor and number one import supply for fruits and vegetables coming into Canada? What would be your comment on another layer at the PMRA for that kind of oversight?
I'd like to pass this one to Rebecca.
Well, as you can imagine, our growers already are having to submit to a number of oversight mechanisms across the board, and having anything additional to it would only increase their time and needed to address those questions that they have and take away from what they're good at, which is producing food. On the government side, our main concern is being able to have the number of products in the toolbox that they need in order to be able to produce. And what we really need is our mechanisms where we can streamline, or the government can streamline the process to research into those products that should be made available, and to increase the productivity and competitivity of our Canadian growers when compared with other countries, especially our neighbors to the south. Thank
you. Infrastructure. It's certainly port congestion, container movement, and the costs related to that. Coming from the part of the country with the largest section of or concentration of greenhouses, I'm familiar with some of the infrastructure shortfalls. Can you provide some more specifics? I know in our area we're looking for some sewers to be built, because that also flips over to some of the labor issues in our area. But more specifically across the country, can you comment beyond ports, or would that be the main area of focus that needs to be addressed from a federal government?
25 seconds.
Yeah, I would suggest that, the definition of infrastructure is much broader. You certainly need to address water, wastewater, connectivity of roads, rail, ports, and, overall infrastructure. And, the long-term nature of planning is, we're planning cities and expansions. We're not thinking about 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, what the requirements will be in a connected multimodal infrastructure. We have to change the way we do that.
Thank you, Mr. Al-Khatib. Mr. Epp, maintenant nous avons Monsieur Drouin pour 6 minutes.
Mr. Drouin, 6 minutes. Go ahead, please. Thank you very much, Chair, and I'd like to thank all the witnesses that are before us this morning, taking the time to appear before the committee.
Yeah, you've raised a few issues that that I've certainly been paying attention to. One of that is the national framework for a labor strategy, and you've mentioned Australia has done that, but I haven't seen. So I'm asking. I don't know what the answer is, and I'm just asking you, how far along have they created this strategy, and have there been positive results based out of that strategy? Are you aware of this, or?
Thank you for the question. And the strategy was developed in over 2020, maybe 2021. From what we were contacted to contribute as an input into Canadian experience as part of their strategy development. What I can tell so far from what they've developed, it's more of a report. What we're looking to do is a bit different. We're looking to create a real action strategic plan where there's short, medium, and long-term actions, and there's kind of an evaluation to make sure we're moving forward on some of the things. And that's something that would be a bit different from what I've seen from the Australian strategy.
Okay, and with regards to Canada, are you measuring like success? How do you measure success versus other countries? Like, do you know how we are doing compared to some of the northern countries up in Europe? Like, for instance, in Holland, how do you measure the labor need versus the output? So, and just explicitly, if I can explain quickly, if one worker 10 years ago was able to output 10 bushels of corn or whatever, today they can do a lot more output because of technology, et cetera, et cetera. So are you measuring that sort of need within the future? And are you able to compare data sets with other countries?
So that's one area that is part of developing the workforce strategy we're looking at. So I don't have that data for you right at hand, but it is an area that we're looking. I can say that the labor shortages in Canada have resulted in workers increasing their own output by about 33% to cover off for not having enough workers in the environment to get the work done that's required. And so how that may change with automation technology, we will be looking at that over the next year.
Okay, and in the short term, I assume that our reliance on temporary foreign workers is one that we cannot take lightly, that we should be doing everything we can to streamline process and make it easier for the ag sector.
Absolutely. Temporary foreign workers are very key to our labor force. And as you can see by the numbers, almost 60,000 workers come in to help meet that labor gap that we have. Without them, the agricultural production would not be viable, probably.
Yes, and we've seen that in Quebec, even when Premier Legault made the announcement for Quebecers to come and work on fields and whatnot, the uptake, even though the unemployment rate was high, still was not there. So it's obviously we have an issue with trying to get access to Canadian labor into the ag sector. You've mentioned the educational sector needs to work together. And are you working with provinces to try and get more programs online and get more students involved in ag programs?
Yeah, one of the things that a new initiative that we've undertaken over the last year is to work more with post-secondary institutions. We do have our colleagues with Ag in the Classroom, for example, are working at the high school level, and we support them with our research and things like that. But some of the work we've been doing at the post-secondary level is to help raise awareness of the opportunities in agriculture, connect with those institutions and students so that students, say, in courses that may not be typical to agriculture, biology, business, finance, get opportunities through things like co-ops and internships and business case competitions to learn more about agriculture, what opportunities might be there for them, and to build that awareness outside of students that are already in school in agriculture programs.
Okay, great. Thank you. Ms. Lee, you've identified the supply chain commissioner as, I don't want to say a tool, but an area where we could go to solve some of the issues that we see, or persistent issues that we see. Is that something that you would see the supply chain commissioner at the federal level looking more at transportation issues? Like we've often talked at this committee about rail interswitching at the time, but other issues like that, like blockages at ports.
I think that the commissioner would really play a coordinating role amongst all of the ministries that would be involved for any particular issue that might come up, and hopefully looking ahead at issues that could come up potentially. But it's really what we're trying to find or to seek with a commissioner is to have one person who would be able to do that coordinating role, make sure that all the departments who are involved are talking to each other and work is done collaboratively.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe I'm out of time.
Absolument. Merci, Monsieur Drouin. Et maintenant, Monsieur...
Absolutely. Now, Mr. Parent, for a few moments. Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd like to, first of all, thank the witnesses for being here today. Ms. Lee, I'd like to follow up on the idea, the concept of the supply chain commissioner. I'd like to give you the opportunity to try to present in more detail your proposal. Mr. Perron?
Just to our witnesses, I've stopped the clock, of course. We're going to try to get this figured out technically, so my apologies. Going to start by seeing if my words can go on to the Hansard Blues and if it's working. And we're back. Donc, Monsieur Parent, peut-être juste recommencer.
Mr. Perron, if you'd like to start from the top again, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. I've got my full 6 minutes, no problem. Okay, so I began by thanking the witnesses for coming before us today. Thank you for your availability, and I wanted to address my first question to Ms. Lee. You were speaking of the Supply Chain Commissioner, and I'd like to give you the opportunity to develop that concept, and I'll explain why. I have some concerns as to having a commissioner. I find your proposal very positively. Well, you'll end up learning French. English interpretation is on the line, going live. I'll speak in French if possible. Mr. Perron, would you like to try once again? Good morning, one and all. 1, 2, 3. Testing the interpretation channel. Is everything coming through? Can you hear me?
Alors, bonjour tout le monde.
Good morning, one and all. Is this any better? Is this any better if I start to chew on the mic? Mr. Falk? Huh. Shoot the interpreter. Yes, that is correct.
English check, English volume check.
OK, peut-être c'est la troisième fois, c'est l'opportunité pour la correction. Donc, maintenant, Monsieur Parent pour la troisième fois.
Mr. Perrin, let's try again. Maybe third time lucky. Does it sound okay? You have the volume now, do you? Yes?
Mr. Parent with the mic, I think it's one of the technical issues. We're having a hell of a time today. Colleagues, we're going to just suspend for a moment for the technical difficulties to get sorted out, and we're going to just suspend for a few minutes. So witnesses, if you could just stay with us.
So I already thanked the witnesses for being here. Ms. Lee, I wanted to give you the occasion to further explain your idea for this commissioner, supply chain commissioner. Certain witnesses expressed certain preoccupations regarding this commissioner that would publish reports without having real power. I know that that's not what you want. So maybe we could give this commissioner another name, or if a minister could maybe be responsible. So I would like to hear you explain your proposal a little bit more in detail, please. Thank you for the question. I'm going to answer in English.
We use the word commissioner maybe to differentiate from a minister, because perhaps it'll be more temporary than a minister, but really how the title is less of important than the actual work that we hope that this person would do. We're really concerned about the urgency of this matter. As you have heard from all the different people who have been witnesses on this, there are a lot of points along the supply chain where there are disruptions, and particularly for our sector that looks at that has perishable products, we're very concerned about this. We've got lots of stories where there have been losses along the chain because of that. We're hoping this person will bring government and industry together, and of course all the departments that are involved in whichever issue we happen to be confronting at the time. We have some specific ideas of where some of these actions could be taken in some of the documents that I think that we provided to the committee. But if we look at, for example, port congestion or the transportation of goods, access to labor, these are very complex matters that involve numerous departments in order to resolve the issues. So we really do need to have a multi-department collaboration involved in this case, and have somebody in a position of leadership that can make sure that everything is falling into place, and that the actions, as you point out, are actually undertaken, and we do get a resolution to this. It would be very important.
Coordinateur.
So this coordinator would not necessarily be a minister. Don't you think that it would be relevant for this person to be a minister so that they would be accountable? Any thoughts on this?
Good point. We certainly have an example with the Grocer Code of Conduct. I think we're getting a lot done on that, and maybe a similar process could be used for that. Yeah, that's a good idea. Could be a similar method.
OK, merci.
Thank you. And when you mentioned the labor shortage, you made tangible suggestions in your documents that you also sent to the government. So have you had any feedback on that? Has anyone given you a timeline, or what is happening?
No direct answers correct just now, beyond the formation of the task force that was mentioned in the supply chain summit. I'm not involved directly in the actual working groups that are on that, so I wouldn't be able to answer on specifics.
OK, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Mr. Al-Khatib, pardon me, could you please tell us more about your precise recommendations that you quickly mentioned in your opening comments? If you had 2 or 3 suggestions to give to the government through this committee today, could you tell us more about that, please?
Much. I think that one of the areas that we focused a lot of attention on at the strategy table was agile regulations. And, when we look at the regulatory burden that is facing the agriculture and food sector, no pun intended, the siloed approach of government, has been quite detrimental when we look at the overall responsibilities of both Agriculture Canada, Canadian Food Inspection Agency, Health Canada, Canadian Grain Commission, just to name a few. This is not about sacrificing public trust and public safety, but the separate nature in which government is acting is imposing additional regulatory burdens, where Canadian companies are launching products and business initiatives in the United States because it's easier to deal with the FDA than it is to deal with our own Canadian regulatory system. this is, wrong in terms of investment and wrong in terms of growth. On the infrastructure side, I mentioned long-term infrastructure planning. Australia is another example we mentioned on the labor side. Same thing on infrastructure. They're doing 50-year infrastructure planning, that is, again, linking the multimodal nature of roads, rails, ports, bridges, and, ensuring that infrastructure is planned on a very long term to accommodate trade. In addition to trade infrastructure, our recommendations were that digital infrastructure needs to be expanded throughout rural Canada, that we can't run an economy based on the new digital opportunity just from Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, and Calgary. So the rural areas and agricultural digital broadband access is critical for the growth of our economy. Those are a few recommendations.
Merci, Monsieur Perron, Monsieur El-Khatib.
Thank you, Monsieur Perron. Thank you, Mr. Al-Khatib. Now, Mr. McGregor, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair. Maybe, Mr. Al-Khatib, I'll continue with you on the subject of infrastructure. You have made some good comments about the need for long-term infrastructure planning, ones that go beyond our electoral cycles, and interesting to see what you mentioned Australia has. I wonder, you have seen, as we all have, how climate change has wreaked havoc just in the last few months with our transportation infrastructure. And, of course, British Columbia has been under threat from wildfires. The prairies, of course, have had their issues with droughts, which have impacted producers' ability to supply the grain that so many depend on. How have the impacts of climate change and the future consequences from it how have they impacted your thinking on what we need to address in terms of our infrastructure planning?
Well, once again, sir, I think that the volatility that we're seeing in weather patterns and the effect on both, infrastructure and also our growing conditions, again, kind of re-emphasize the need for long-term planning. What we're going to have is we're going to have consistent production, at a certain base level. But what we're seeing is with the gains in technology, digital yields and things, that the crop in Western Canada, or the Canadian crop, can now move from an average of, let's say, 56 million tons. It will be not unlikely to see 72 to 75 million tons, depending if conditions go well or not. You can't move a system for 20 million additional tons without some long-term planning. So the part of that is that, again, traditional rail, we need to get products that belong in pipes, and we need to get product that belongs on rail. So we need to optimize, the best and safest use of transporting those commodities. We need to ensure as well that, we recognize that multimodal infrastructure will provide surge capacity. And, if we look at intermodal and container systems, they're running on separate trains than bulk systems. And that is a good way in which we can create capacity that can come in and out as we need it. So I think that, again, the
Thank you,
move
Mr.
to value add is important.
Yeah, I need to get a few more questions into our other witnesses, so thank you for that. Ms. Wright, maybe I'll turn to you. I'm curious, in the studies that you've done and consultations, particularly with our educational facilities, reaching out to high school students and post-secondary, can you tell me, have you done any kind of surveys? I mean, what are students' perceptions of what agricultural jobs are? Are they aware of what opportunities exist, what skills are needed? Because I think we need to have that kind of feedback if we need to do more outreach to our students to let them know what the changing nature of agriculture is today and in the future.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And it is part of the work that we have started to undertake in the last year in particular with our Agri-Talent program, reaching out to post-secondary students. Certainly, anecdotally, we've heard that there isn't a great awareness amongst non-agriculture students or those that may not have grown up in a rural or agriculture environment about the opportunities that are there. And so it's part of the work that we're undertaking and looking to work with industry and government to also support the work in raising the awareness and addressing some of the perceptions that may not be accurate about those opportunities that are there.
And, could the federal government be doing more, particularly with financial aid to students, like more grants that are specifically oriented to certain sectors, like the highly technical nature in some agricultural sectors? Do we need more educational grants to encourage people to get their Class 1 licenses for long-haul trucking? Do you have recommendations you'd like to see us include in our committee report?
I think any support that would encourage people to consider all the opportunities that are available in agriculture would be welcomed. Certainly, as you mentioned, with Class 1 drivers and things like that, it can be very expensive to get your license. So any support around that, I think, would be welcomed and would be helpful.
Thank you so much. And then finally, my final question to the Canadian Horticultural Council, Ms. Lee and Mr. Woods. I know that this has been a time of great stress on your sector, and thank you for very clearly illuminating that. But I'm also wondering, are there any notable examples of your members who have been innovating to meet these challenges? Because I know we ultimately, of course, want the federal government we want to have good recommendations for what the federal government can do. But do you have any notable examples of how members have been stepping up to try and meet these challenges in new and innovative ways?
Thank you. There's lots of signs of innovation across the sector from coast to coast, whether it's in the greenhouse industry in Leamington, Ontario, whether it's potato producers in PEI in Quebec, Ontario. There's innovation through automation, camera grading systems, reduction of labor resources. But those all come with extreme challenges in themselves, as they are new and up and coming production methods and technologies. We lack the expertise to maintain and service those systems themselves. So it's an ongoing struggle that now we've changed from manual labor processes to requiring engineers and industrial millwrights and stuff like that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. Thank you, Mr. Woods. Look, colleagues, we're at time for the first panel. Obviously, we had technical difficulties. We have the ability to extend, but I also know that certainly following this meeting, preparation for question period, those might participate. How would you like us to proceed? Would you like to do perhaps 5 and 5 for the, I don't know how our friends at the block, is that okay? 5 and 5? Okay, and then we'll move on to our next one. So, maintenant, Monsieur Liu pour 5 minutes. Après ça, Mr. Lewis, et we'll finish there.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being with us. First question would be for Ms. Wright or Ms. Lee in relation with a possible strategy that we would like, or you would like to see. Who would be in charge of coordinating that strategy, and what would be the powers? I mean, have you already reflected on that? We're talking about creating commissioners, a supply commissioner. I mean, there are a lot of regulations so far, so I'm not convinced that, having one person in charge of everything would be the best solution. So what is your opinion? A strategy is good, but who is going to be in charge and who is going to be accountable to whom? So maybe Ms. Lee? So you're mentioning the commissioner for the supply chain or for the labor strategy? Well, I think it's important to have a very broad vision of these two elements so that we may choose a strategy regarding labor, but, the supply chain commissioner. I mean, what will the exact role of that person will be? I mean, we need to understand the role that is required. So, who's going to be in charge of the strategy? Well, for the commissioner, I would say it is really a role of coordinator.
The different departments to make sure that everybody is going in the same direction and that there's agreement on what that direction and what the actions should be for that. For the labor strategy, for the labor work, I will let Ms. Wright answer because she's been more involved in that than I have.
Yes, thank you for the question. And I think it's a very good question of who leads and where the accountability is. That's something that we are building into the work that we're doing. And it's something that I guess our organization has been the coordinator but bringing together industry and ensuring that as many industry representatives as possible are part of that process is very important. And building in to the strategy actionable items that have timelines and accountability is what we're looking to do.
Okay. Merci pour la réponse.
Thank you for the answer. When I'm looking at the difficulties we have with regard to labor issues, I mean, there are 3 departments which are involved most of the time in the coordination, and there is a lack of coordination. Now, would the solution be coming from the commissioner? And on the strategy, there will be someone in charge or responsible, whether it be department X or Y. But I mean, someone needs to be responsible somewhere, because right now, things are being pushed from one place to the other. So what is your opinion on that?
From the strategy point of view, I would say that, we're really happy to see that there's increased coordination between, for example, Ministry of Agriculture and Food and ESDC. But there does need to be probably more coordination and moving more in that direction to help with some of the issues, as you mentioned.
What about the Australian model? Is that clearer? Do they have someone in charge, accountable, also with regard to respecting the timelines, which are very important? Because you've been saying that every 10 years our lack of or labor deficit is doubling. So, things are getting more and more complicated, aren't they? Ms. Wright?
Yes, thank you. They are getting more complicated. What we can see from the Australian approach at this point is more of a report and recommendations. We are looking at how they are following up on those recommendations. For us and for the work that we're doing in Canada, we're very interested in ensuring that all of this work is actionable, as I mentioned, and not a report and not recommendations, but something that can identify who's going to move things forward, and making sure the commitment for those organizations are there to move things forward.
Merci, Madame
Merci.
Wright. Merci, Monsieur Liu. Maintenant, Monsieur Lewis pour 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank all the witnesses and your sectors for continuing and stepping up and supplying food during these challenging few years. So it's very much appreciated. I would like to begin my questioning with Mr. Al-Khatib from the Agri-Food Economic Strategy Table. I wanted to start by, you mentioned the plant protein, the protein extraction plant in Regina. And, there have been advancements in government funding, value-added transformation of raw goods, such as Natural Products Canada, Canada Protein Industry Supercluster, like you said in Regina. What kind of impacts have they had, and why is that innovation in value-added products important? What is the impact to Canadians here, and what would the impact be for exports?
Yeah, great question. Definitely the supercluster has moved the needle in terms of, taking about $172 million of government funding, partnering it with roughly about $374 million of private sector funding. The innovation pipeline in the plant-based protein side, Canada has taken a market step forward in that area. Now it's about commercialization. So when we look at, the demand of that consumer around the world, this isn't about consuming less traditional protein. Protein is just growing faster than we can produce it. And so, again, there's an opportunity that will spread right to return at the farm gate. The advances in digital agriculture are going to allow us to track the gains in sustainability, traceability, and food safety. That's going to mean, much higher return at the farm gate. That's what's the exciting part of that opportunity.
Maybe to follow up, as Canada is moving forward, are there other countries that are also doing things that we can look to make improvements, to move things in a faster way? Other countries that are doing the same sort of thing?
Well, I would say that everybody's trying to follow us, actually, and we're encouraging the government to continue with its ability to move fast. Infrastructure is going to be key. We need that container intermodal side to be much more reliable. And I do want to, remind policymakers that, steamship container line consolidation has really created a global oligopoly with global steamship lines showing record profits in the tens of billions of dollars. So a lot of the supply chain issues we're talking about here are really, looking at, pricing power that steamship lines have over industries. Governments need to make sure that they're checking that. We're not seeing that today.
I appreciate you mentioning that. There's something that other witnesses have in there, so I'm hoping that will be in the report. Just to pivot, because of shortness of time here, one action you suggested was in your opening statement was developing and diversifying Canada's agri-food markets. Genomics, I wanted to talk about. It's a young science, and it's got the potential to produce more high-quality, safe food on less land with less of an environmental impact. So I was wondering if we could discuss how genomic technologies can fit into the ag sector and how we can get your input and how we can equip industries to be more productive and sustainable and competitive globally. I know in 2021, the government announced $400 million for a pan-Canadian genomic strategy. So what potential can genomics have to alleviate the pressures and innovate our sector?
Yeah, it's all about doing more with less. That's going to lower our carbon intensity, and understanding the genomics properly, allowing the proper evolution of varieties is going to be very, very important. And again, it's all about technology and innovation and staying ahead. And drought resistance, climate change is having an effect. And so the ability and the volatility of agricultural production needs to be attacked with technology. So the strategy on genomics is very sound and certainly going to deliver some very strong benefit for the sector going forward.
Perfect, thank you. With only a minute left, maybe I could ask Ms. Wright from the Canadian Agricultural Human Resource Council. We talked about education, post-education, post-secondary, connecting with industry and students. I know in my region we've got Conestoga College, which has an agricultural equipment operating program, agribusiness management program. You mentioned biology, business, the finance side, all those opportunities available. In the last minute, can you give us examples of programs maybe throughout Canada that are showing success so we can kind of learn best how to share these practices?
Sure. Thank you for the question. And definitely the programs that, particularly the new program at Conestoga, is a great example of the type of things that need to be thought of and implemented to help train people fairly quickly to engage in the industry. I think some other great examples are like smart farms that Wolds College has. I believe University of Manitoba has one as well, helping really connect students with hands-on.
Thank you, Ms. Wright. Thank you. I'm sorry, we're at time. Now, Mr. Parent, I know I'm not trying to be unfair, but I'm trying to make sure we stay on time. Do you have one very specific question or no?
Oui. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Wright, you have mentioned in your presentation that the labor shortage was quite significant and has led to an increase of 35% of input, and that you might need some help for automation. My question, the emergency plan that has been introduced for foreign workers, did you receive a response from the government? And would you need support or an investment policy in the agri-food sector? Thank you.
For the question, the emergency plan that was put forward by the food manufacturing side of production. So I can't comment on the process that's going on there or if they've received feedback. My apologies.
Mr. McGregor, do you have one quick question? I'll let our second panel. Okay. I appreciate that, and I didn't mean to squeeze you guys. We're trying to stay on time. Thank you. Look, on behalf of the committee, to our witnesses, thank you very much for your time here today. We apologize for some of the technical difficulties we encountered, but I know we're all richer as a result of your testimony and your evidence here today. So thank you so much. Colleagues, we're going to break just for a minute or two, and we are going to get our second panel in. So thank you very much. We'll resume momentarily. was record speed. So we're on our second panel today, and of course, joining us by teleconference, we have the Canadian Canola Growers Association. We have Dave Carey. Dave, good to see you, and Steve Pratt, who serves as the policy manager. Dave Carey, of course, serving as Vice President of Government and Industry Relations. Welcome. From the Canola Council of Canada, we have Chris Davidson, who serves as Vice President, Stakeholder and Industry Relations. And from McGill University, we have Pascal Thériault, who serves as the Agriculture Economist and Director, Farm Management and Technology. And Mr. Thériault, as a Liberal member, I couldn't help but notice the color of your jacket. I think it looks just wonderful on you. We're going to start for 5 minutes. We're going to get started with Mr. Carey. Over to you for 5 minutes, sir.
Good afternoon. I'm joined here, as you said, by my colleague Steve from our Winnipeg office. Steve's a leading expert on rail policy. Thanks for inviting us to speak today about your study on the agriculture supply chain in Canada. CCG is the voice of Canada's 43,000 canola farmers. In any given year, over 90% of Canadian canola in the form of raw seed, or the two processed products, oil and meal, is ultimately destined for export market to more than 50 countries. In 2020, $13.7 billion worth of canola was exported. We're the world's largest producer and exporter of this high-value oilseed, and our industry is estimated to support 207,000 jobs and contribute $29.9 billion to the Canadian economy annually. Canola farmers rely on rail transportation to move their products to export customers and to keep those product prices competitive with the global oilseed market. Canola travels on average 1,500 kilometers from farm to tidewater to be in export position. Farmers independently strive to maximize both the quantity and quality of their production each year. Once harvested, they sell their canola into the system based on their specific marketing plan, with the overall goal of capturing the highest possible prices at any given time in a dynamic and ever-fluctuating global commodity market. Transportation of grain is one of several commercial elements that directly affects the prices offered to farmers. When issues arise in the supply chain, the prices farmers receive for their grain can drop, even at times when commodity prices are high in the global marketplace. In periods of prolonged rail disruptions, the worst case scenario is when space in grain elevators becomes full and grain companies stop buying grain and accepting delivery from farmers. This can occur even when a farmer has a contract for delivery in place, potentially straining their ability to cash flow their operations. This is a major reason why Western Canadian farmers have such an invested interest in transportation. It directly affects individual farmers' income, and beyond that, they rely on rail service, the service of Canada's railways, to move grain to export position. There's no alternative now or into the near future. The modern grain supply chain is predicated on having the right grain in the right place at the right time. There are a lot of moving parts in this complex system. Let me turn to the specific question at hand. What is the current situation and difficulties in the ag supply chain? Our perspective, two different levels, the here and now and into the future, and then I'll offer suggestions as to the role the federal government can play. In crop year 2020-21, the railway set a new benchmark in the movement of Western Canadian grain, shipping over 61 million tons. Within that, over 52 million tons fell under the maximum revenue entitlement regulation, setting a new volume record. And for the first time, both CN and CP Rail each earned over $1 billion. All stakeholders benefited from the strong supply chain performance, and it showed what can be done when the grain handling and transportation system work effectively. This year has been an illustration of great contrast, both good and bad, and has given us yet another illustration as to how fragile the ag supply chain in Canada really is. This time, the source of the disruption was severe weather that severed the critical railway artery twice in 5 months in the same general area in British Columbia. Since fully reopening on December 5th, the railway system recovery is an ongoing struggle, which has been witnessed by performance metrics observed by Canada's grain shippers. This could have been an extremely bad situation for the entire ag sector, but to some degree, the negative impacts on farmers were mitigated by a 40% smaller crop last year due to the Western Canadian drought and the strong export program in the weeks before the railway disruptions. But there have been significant costs accruing to the exporters, largely due to contractual costs associated with grain vessels. This has had a major impact on the grain sector due to the fact that 70% due to the export profile of our commodities. Currently, 70% of Western Canadian bulk grain is all destined for the Port of Vancouver. This is enabled by significant investment by grain exporters in the Port of Vancouver the last decade. The current and future importance of this particular West Coast export outlet cannot be understated. We look to 2030, we anticipate further rising demand for our products, both domestically and internationally. As a country, we need to prioritize and coordinate an approach to critical infrastructure. There's work being done, but it needs to be expanded. It is complicated as the ownership of tunnels, bridges, railway lines, and roads vary. You could point to the North Shore grain terminals in the Port of Vancouver as a prime example. There's one rail line that transits through a tunnel and then over a lift bridge, both owned by that railway. To access the 4 grain terminals on the North Shore, this route also serves as the other bulk commodity terminals, such as for sulfur and coal. There's no backup routing to serve these terminals in the event of a disruption, the tunnel or bridge. In conclusion, as witnessed last fall, when critical supply chain infrastructure is imperiled, the entire system can be affected. The 2015 report of the Canada Transportation Act Review took a comprehensive look at governance and coordination of investment and project planning and made a variety of recommendations as to how to do this. We need to get back in the business of nation-building projects. Canadian farmers and industry will need an effective and responsive rail-based transportation system, not just for transportation of the current crop sizes, but for those of the future. Moreover, farmers will need to capitalize on the opportunities for Canada's existing and future trade agreements and can't do so without a reliable and efficient rail system that grain shippers and our global customers have confidence in.
Thank you, Mr. Carey. Mr. Davison, for 5 minutes. Over to you.
Great. Thank you. Chair Bois and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to be with you today and to join you with my fellow panelists. The Canola Council encompasses all links in the canola value chain. Our members include canola growers, life science companies, grain handlers, exporters, processors, and others. Our shared goal is to ensure the industry's continued growth and success, and to do this by meeting global demand for canola and canola-based products, which include food, feed, fiber, and fuel. As you've heard, our industry represents almost $30 billion in economic activity annually, 207,000 jobs, $12 billion in wages, and the largest share of farm cash receipts in the country. Our strategic plan is built on 3 key pillars: sustainable and reliable supply, differentiated value, and stable and open trade, all of which are connected with and dependent on a well-functioning supply chain. I don't need to tell anyone here about the perfect storm our agriculture and agri-food sectors have faced over the last 12 to 24 months or so, be it weather, COVID, transportation, shortages of material inputs, and labor challenges, to name just a few. We have heard about all of these from our members. But our message to you is not just about the supply chain challenges of today. It's about the importance of addressing and future-proofing against the challenges of the future to support growth and competitiveness. Our biggest challenge as an industry is meeting demand for our product, both domestically and internationally. Today, we export over 90% of the canola we produce to more than 50 countries around the world that are hungry for healthy cooking oils, sustainably produced sources of biofuel feedstocks, and meal that enhances the diets of livestock. At the same time, here in Canada, in the last 12 months or so, we have had announcements of more than $2 billion in capital investments related to the building of new, as well as expansion of existing domestic crushing and processing facilities for canola. These announcements have been driven primarily by market signals regarding the development of the North American biofuels market. The demand fundamentals for what we produce are strong, but could also be altered significantly in terms of their domestic and international makeup over the course of the next several years. We are also not without challenges, including post-COVID protectionism and intensified competition. To be sure, part of being a reliable supplier is to have the products our customers want and being able to get those products to them when, where, and how they want them. But if the definition of a supply chain is about the full sequence of processes involved in the production and distribution of a good or service to the consumer or end user, there is also more to think about. With the limited time we have today, I want to highlight 3 areas of consideration as you continue your study of our agricultural and agri-food supply chain. They are innovation, regulation, and market access. It's important to highlight the fundamental role innovation plays in our ongoing ability to meet customer demand, and hence its role as part of an effective supply chain. We are currently in the process of updating and refreshing our innovation strategy with a focus on improving performance, increasing precision, protecting the crop and markets, and focusing on our strengths as an oilseed crop. Support for this strategy and its recommendations, inclusive of research investments and collaboration between growers, government, universities, and private researchers, will be crucial to our ongoing ability to be a reliable supplier. A more resilient crop leads to a more resilient supply chain, and innovations within the canola industry will help ensure that the crop is better positioned to withstand the impacts of our changing climate and other agronomic and production challenges. However, these innovations can only come to fruition with the support of a predictable and science-based regulatory system, the second area of interest. We are longstanding advocates of a regulatory system that provides appropriate safeguards for health and safety and that also enables sector innovation and competitiveness. As it relates to a well-functioning supply chain, such a regulatory system must ensure that Canadian canola farmers have access to the crop protection and seed tools and technologies they need to continue to grow the great Canadian innovation that is canola, but not just grow it, grow more of it even more sustainably through increased productivity to meet the needs of our customers. Without these tools, we will not retain our status as a reliable supplier. Finally, I want to highlight market access. The Canadian canola supply chain is highly integrated into global markets, with exports of seed, oil, and meal valued at $13.7 billion in 2021. The largest markets for our exports are the United States, China, Japan, Mexico, and the European Union. And the risk to producers and others in the supply chain, if access to these or other markets is restricted, is real and something we have experienced firsthand. As part of our efforts to support stable and open trade, we have a market access plan built around specific pillars that include eliminating tariffs, science-based sanitary and phytosanitary rules, and access to innovation and technology. Our market access approach relies on clear organization of responsibilities, cooperation, and common commitment from both industry and government. Industry's roles include market promotion by working closely with customers, prioritizing opportunities through identification of markets, export destinations, and innovations with the greatest potential, and execution by ensuring quality, arranging logistics in an efficient way, and selling into valuable markets.
Thank you, Mr. Davison. Perhaps right on time. And maintenant, Monsieur Thériault pour 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Bonjour, je vous remercie de nous entendre aujourd'hui.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here today. Canadians have to profit from their systems. We have a very efficient and well-established system, and it produces food which is the least costly in the entire world. Our agri-food system is developed mainly based on family farms that have grown over time. The increase in size of these family farms is partly caused by need for profitability. Downward pressure of prices over time has led to a phenomenon where businesses have had no choice but to grow and expand in order to maintain a certain profitability in face of ever-decreasing margins. Our efficiency in producing and providing the product to consumers through the chain of producer, processor, transporters, wholesalers, retailers doesn't need to be proved anymore. The system has been working efficiently when everyone was working on the chain. The pandemic, of course, exposed weaknesses in the system. We needed only one link in the chain to fail in order to feel the results throughout the process. We lost a lot of efficiency, and they've had to increase the cost of production. As we emerge from this pandemic, we can ask ourselves what lies ahead in the future as we see the inflation on inputs and therefore the cost of food, combined with labor problems in both the agricultural and agri-food sectors. So we have to look for particular solutions in labor shortages, professional, in order to continue to feed Canadians. More important still, the government must put into place the resources necessary to involve the public in this. As a society, we have to understand what is involved in providing these products. We have to educate consumers as well in order that they may understand what we're trying to do and why we're doing it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Thériault. And now we'll go to the round of questioning. Mr. Barlow for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for our witnesses for being here. I'm going to start with Mr. Carey and the Canola Growers Association, just on some of the comments that you made in your presentation. And you noted that, after a very strong crop year in 2020, 2021, we could have seen some major disruption. We did see some major disruptions as a result of the flooding in BC and some other issues. But you also mentioned that it could have been much worse if we had a typical sized crop in 2021, 2022. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit what could have happened had we had, a typical or normal crop this past year compared to the previous year?
Thanks for the question. I'll begin, but I'll actually defer to my colleague Steve. I'd say that one really important aspect of this is our reputation as a global trader, right? And the fact that we need to get our canola to our customers in market as soon as possible. So if we'd had a normal year, this would have been a perfect storm in the worst possible way. But Steve, maybe I'll call on you to provide more specific details.
Very quickly to your question, Mr. Barlow. Certainly, I think we could look and see what happened in 13-14 with the backlog when we had a bumper crop. You would have seen similar effects. I think there's analysts out there that would have pointed to if we would have had a normal sized crop, you would have seen the plug-in of elevators in country. And then for the farmers at the farm gate, that inability to deliver, therefore crunching on their credit and having to draw on the various commercial programs out there to finance their farm operations. That would be what the impact would be out in country for farmers.
Thank you. You also mentioned, specifically the situation at the North Shore of Vancouver, and how delicate that situation is with the tunnel and the bridge. And we had actually Mr. Murad Al-Khatib from AGT Foods here previously, and he talked about the importance of a long-range infrastructure plan. But one of the comments that he made was also that we need to ensure that products that can be moved in a pipeline are moved in a pipeline, freeing up space on rail. Maybe your comment on that and what kind of impact, the delicate situation that we have at the Port of Vancouver and some of the opportunities that we have to better use transportation tools that are available to us to move product to ensure that we get them to market in a timely fashion.
I'll start again. I'll call on Steve. I think as we indicated, about 70% of bulk grain ends up going through Vancouver. For canola, that's about 7 million tons a year. Prince Rupert takes about 1.8 million, and Thunder Bay takes about 1.6 million. So we just can't ignore where that commercial canola crop is destined for market. I think any improvements we can make to the system, looking at it from a more long-term perspective, and listening to the previous panel, not based on electoral cycles, is critically important. If we look at, as I mentioned, the sort of nation building, I think Supply Chain Summit was the first start. But again, I might call my colleague Steve to provide some more of the kind of technical perspective.
Again, very briefly, Mr. Barlow, certainly at some point in the near future, ideally all commodities will take off again, Canadian export wise. So be it grain, be it potash, sulfur, coal, what have you. And there will come a time, in our view, that the capacity of the North Shore will become strained. And there is study that has been done. I think it's known. But again, getting back to Mr. Al-Khatib's recommendations, especially from the 2015 Canadian Transportation Act review, the strategy table, we really need to start thinking about these things and plotting out our action, again, in a nonpartisan way, just because of the fact that at some point as a exporting nation, this is all going to come down to bear.
I appreciate that. And for both, I guess we look back at that 2015 report of the review of the Canadian Transportation Act and some recommendations that were in there, again, that I'm assuming we haven't followed up upon to try to address some of these critical kinks in the supply chain. And I look back at the rail blockades of 2 years ago, certainly the CN strike. There's been lots of opportunities for us to address some of these issues and still haven't done that. But you touched on, and maybe Mr. Davison, you can jump in on this as well, the impact that this is having on our reputation as a trusted trading partner, being able to meet our commitments around the world and our competitiveness. Can you go into a little bit more detail? We always talk about our reputation, but what are the ramifications if we lose that reputation of being a trusted resource or trusted source and lose our competitiveness? What is the overall result of that? And I know that's a big question, but maybe touch on that as best you can.
I'll start on that and pass it to my colleague Chris. I think, Canada, we're lucky. We control 60% of the world's trade of canola. Australia is our biggest competitor, but there's other oil seeds that are happy to step up and fill that. Soybeans from Brazil, the United States. Canola is a Canadian invention, one that we want to see more abroad. So there's definitely times where customers, just like we see in Canada in our grocery stores, it's a just-in-time delivery system. They need that great grain at the right time in the right place. But I'll ask Chris to weigh in.
Yeah, just a couple of builds there, maybe. I think, part of what we rely on with Canadian canola is our differentiated value. And so we've got a unique value proposition of canola products that's well recognized in terms of providing high quality and useful functionalities. But we can't take that for granted. We certainly continue to do work in established markets that already recognize those superior properties, but we also continue to build deeper appreciation for what canola and canola-based products have to have in developing markets where we see opportunity going down the road. But as Dave alluded to, particularly coming out of a year like we had in 2021, I think there's some challenges to that. One is I alluded to it briefly in terms of post-COVID.
Mr. Davison, I do apologize. I was going to hope you to be able to finish that statement, but we do want to stay on time. So I'm going to go to Mr. Turnbull for 6 minutes now.
Okay.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and appreciate all the panelists being here today. Thank you for your testimony and the incredible work that you and your organizations do every day to maintain a robust food system in Canada. Perhaps my questions will focus at first on Mr. Thériault. I hope I said it right. My French isn't so great these days. I'm working on it, but I have two lines of questioning for you, Mr. Thériault. One is related to efficiency versus resilience. And another line of questioning related to more corporate consolidation within agriculture and new farm entrants, and sort of line of questioning on each of those. So, Mr. Thériault, I understand in the past you've said that Canada's food system is highly efficient and mature. And I think what we've seen over the course of the pandemic and multiple natural disasters over the last couple of years, we've seen that efficiency often achieved by increasing scale, consolidating operations, and reducing costs such as wages can come at a great price when there are interruptions or there's moments of crisis. For example, in 2020, we saw COVID outbreaks in 2 multinational meat processing facilities in Alberta, which resulted in a backlog of roughly 100,000 cattle, costing hundreds of millions of dollars in extra feed and lost revenues. So I think we all understand, from my perspective, that efficiency is really important in our food system. But I wondered, in your opinion, has our focus on efficiency, in fact, had a detrimental effect in terms of increasing our vulnerability in times of disruption? Could you comment on that, Mr. Thériault?
Well, I think we had to get the plant size we got to because of the efficiency, because we do compete on the world market, and therefore we must sell at the world price. And especially in meat processing, if we expect to be competitive, we have to be amongst the ones that can produce at the lowest cost. And that did involve some high concentration for slaughtering in beef, in poultry, in the hog sector also. And indeed, once one of those plants was hit, of course, the effect was much larger than if like 1 out of 10 little plants would have been hit to produce the same exact volume.
If we had much more processing capacity and shorter supply chains, do you think that would increase our ability to manage those types of disruptions in times of crisis?
One of the bigger costs that we have when we look at slaughtering, it's all the fixed costs that come with technology, that come with maintaining those capital assets. And that is why over time we move toward a larger, more efficient way of doing it, although it does have its weaknesses.
So can you diagnose any of the weaknesses that you think we could work on that, from your perspective, would be targets for the federal government to implement some changes?
Well, one way to go is definitely to go toward automation of the slaughtering process. Corporations, processors have a hard time recruiting employees. That's not particular to the ag sector, but the difference with the ag sector is that we are dealing with biological goods, and there's a perishability that exists. And therefore, going toward automation is probably the best way we have to alleviate that labor shortage, but it comes at a cost. And if you're going to start talking about, I don't know, $100,000 to $300,000 per position you would replace, well, those processors need access to those funds to allow that processing or that transformation toward automation to happen.
So automation would decrease the cost of labor, but obviously there would be a large capital outlay at the beginning for companies to replace the labor cost, right? Given automation is pretty expensive.
Yes, it is always a trade-off where you do fix capital assets to replace labor, and therefore there's an upfront cost and then a maintenance cost that would be probably effectively cheaper than hiring labor. But in the short run, processors need to have access to those funds.
So the upfront costs is something that the federal government could help to finance, or what do you think?
I think the federal government could play a major role toward financing or helping those processors to face the cost to keep our sector competitive.
Okay, thank you. And I want to move to my second line of questioning now, which is about corporate consolidation. The ownership and control of Canada's food producing land are becoming more concentrated. This has been a trend that's been growing over many years. According to a new report from the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, in Saskatchewan, 8% of farms operate and control 38% of the farmland. In Alberta, 6% of farms operate 40% of the farmland. In Manitoba, 4% of farms operate and control 24% of the farmland. So you mentioned family farms in your opening remarks and the push for more profitability and how we have some of the lowest prices in the world. I'm wondering whether this consolidation is creating also problems when we see that there's also a decline of about 70% in terms of young and new farmers entering agriculture. There's some statistics on that I've read recently.
I'm sorry, Mr.
I would like to hear whether you think
Mr. Turnbull, I apologize. I tried to give you a few extra seconds as one of my colleagues, as I would anyone, but unfortunately we're over time. Maintenant, Monsieur Parent pour 6 minutes.
Monsieur Parent for 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for being with us today. I'd like to continue with questions to you, Mr. Thériault, on this land ownership and control. You said it's quite difficult to reduce costs and maintain our competitivity. Government support, of course, policy of capital investment in the agricultural sector. Should it be more quick? Well, the final cost that the producer gets on his product he'll probably pay less per head for cattle they slaughter, for example. And then again, we're going to end up with a problem of concentration on the production end. Well, exactly. That's exactly what I was expecting to hear. In Quebec, of course, there's a heavy concentration in slaughterhouses, for example. And independent producers are kind of left on the sidelines. The federal government could assist, of course, in financing automation of these major enterprises. But don't you think we should be creating a network, regional networks, perhaps smaller sized enterprises? But it would secure our supply chain, give us some alternatives if ever we had a problem, disruption of the supply chain. What do you think? Well, such a parallel network could easily exist, and there's definitely a space for that to secure, to a certain degree, our markets and our capacity, our slaughterhouse capacity. That of itself, it's a matter of the chicken or the egg. They want to continue producing, but they want to pay the least possible to process. So even if you had a regional network, they would consider to exist, but only exist. In order to support the automation of larger centers, do you think that we should have a policy to ensure the longevity, the sustainability of these smaller enterprises? Well, we have the major processors, meat processors, In the past, the government, in rationalizing the system, asked these major players to get involved financially to buy up disaffected slaughterhouses, pork, for example, so that we can compete on a world market. Well, COVID crisis pointed out the weak spots in our supply chain. Perhaps this error of the past should be re-examined, and we should perhaps be looking at a more regionalized system or subsystem, if you wish, so that we can ensure better sharing of the processing and ease up on our transportation systems as well. Well, look, there's room for circuit breaker systems, but we don't have too many distributors of these products either. They're huge wholesalers, and it's the less they have to do with a large number of suppliers, the easier, more effective it is for wholesaling, for distribution, because we compete for lower price right down to the final consumer. We also bet a lot on the quality of our products, but everybody wants to eat at the cheapest price possible. Okay, I'll switch tracks here. You talked about assisting the labor force in this, as well as the consumer in the agri-food system. Do you have specific recommendations on that score? Well, as to the trades, I've been examining this for over 15 years. And once we get out of the agricultural sector itself, there is a lot of misunderstanding as what that sector is and how much technology plays a role in agricultural production. Career counselors are not going to send young graduates. Why a biologist rather than an agronomist? We need both. We need technicians and technologists in order to deal with agricultural equipment itself. It's all been taken for granted, and we have farms. But we have to insist that the agricultural sector is a subject that's going to be regularized, standardized, taught in the schools. We have good quality controls. The producers are ready for that, but there's a price on that. The more we insist on more and more demands and trained labor, for example, it's going to cost. Okay, one final question, if I have the time. I'm afraid you don't. Maybe the next round. Mr. McGregor, you have 6 minutes.
Nice try, though. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for being with us today. I'd like to direct my first questions both to the canola growers and to the Canola Council. I know that we have been trying our utmost to add more crush capacity, and certainly with changes to the clean fuel standards and trying to add more biofuel refining capacity in Canada, which are incredible value-added products and which really help our canola producers. I guess I just want to know, as we bring more of that online, both crush capacity and biofuel refining, what is that going to do in terms of longer-term trends to Canada's supply chain issues? Because I know, per rail car, you get much more value for oil. And certainly if we're trying to grow more biofuel refining here in Canada to, have more carbon neutral fuels, I'm just curious as to what the longer term trends will be for our supply chains.
Maybe I can kick it off and then ask Dave and Steve to join in. I think there's a few different ways to look at this. Certainly, on one aspect of the supply chain, we may see some change in balance over time between domestic and export, because the biofuels market that you're talking about is largely focused on North America, Canada, and the US. So I would call that out. And also with that, we will also anticipate to see some change in movement in direction then. So obviously not forsaking what we've got in terms of that east-west movement that my colleagues were talking about earlier to ports, but also given both the Canadian domestic market and certainly the size of the U.S. market to the south of us, we will expect to see some increased north-south traffic as well. But maybe Dave and Steve want to add to that.
Oh, it's a great question. I think it speaks to some of the conversations earlier at committee where we're also looking to produce more, Mr. McGregor. So we're looking to intensify to move up to our goal of 52 bushels an acre, so to produce more. So we definitely don't see it as an all or nothing. But what is interesting, if we look at where the trade irritants that canola face, it does tend to be around the trading of raw seed. When you get into the value added, it is a different sort of trade avenue. And actually, the non-tariff trade issues that we do face with canola tend to be canola seed specific, and are different when you get into meal or oil, because you're not dealing with maximum residue level limits and other things like that.
And I very much empathize with your with what you outlined with the Port of Vancouver. I mean, I guess the problem with the Port of Vancouver is it's stuck between the mountains to the north and the U.S. border to the south. It is a massive population center, which is growing up. You have residential areas pretty much right beside industrial facilities, and the Burrard Inlet is incredibly congested, and of course you have that narrow point right by the Lions Gate Bridge. That being said, I mean, and it's affecting my constituents right across the water in Vancouver Island. When we don't see an efficient port operation, we see vessels anchoring in the waters around my riding for weeks at a time. My constituents feel like they're being used as an industrial overflow parking lot for the Port of Vancouver. I know that, in the United States, the U.S. port envoy, he expressed a view that participants in the global supply chains do not share sufficient information. And since we have clear federal jurisdiction both over our rail networks and our port operations, I'm just wondering what more we can do to facilitate that information sharing so that vessels are arriving in an efficient manner, so they are not staying anchored for 8 weeks at a time nowhere near the Port of Vancouver, so that we have maybe some kind of a just-in-time arrival system. Do you have any thoughts as to what we can be recommending in terms of that?
Maybe I just begin by just saying, certainly can sympathize having family in your riding as well, Mr. McGregor, but the accrual cost for those tankers or those grain vessels sitting there is significant. That's passed on to the export and ultimately, hurts our farmer constituents. But I might ask my colleague Steve for his perspective at a more granular level.
Yeah, so certainly what you experience and what you're seeing even this year as being an emphatic point is the suboptimal outcome of our supply chain disruptions, right? That proxy kind of visual or metric being the number of boats, be them grain, be them other bulk commodities, be them container. Absolutely not an efficient use of anyone's time. Obviously, on the human aspect, as you just referenced, there are. If we were talking about this 10 years ago, I think where we're at today, as far as information sharing, programs, the robustness of data. Grain sector, we have a platinum system with several of our ways to see things. The Port of Vancouver has got their pilot project under development, and Transport Canada is working on some other supply chain metrics. I would just say, though, that allows you to understand what has happened. Potentially, there would be some warning signs, but again, with such a multi-party actor system, the most perfect data in the world still does not save you from having actual supply chain issues, which the ramification thereof is the boat sitting out there. So a roundabout answer for you, Mr. McGregor, but
and quickly, Mr. Pratt, just a very final last 30 seconds. When we do have those sudden interruptions to supply chain or to our transportation networks, like we saw in November with the flooding, cutting off the Port of Vancouver from the rest of Vancouver, like what systems do your people have in place to get around that very quickly, or do we need more so there's that real-time data so people can reroute their shipments?
So people knew it was coming. You could see it in the data, but unfortunately the boats are booked months in advance, so that's not going to be helpful.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. Thank you, Mr. Pratt. We're going to go to one more panel, so we'll go 5-5, 2.5, 2.5, and then we'll wrap up. Over to the Conservatives. It's Mr. Falk. Sorry, Mr. Falk, I should have welcomed you to the committee. Welcome. Great to see you, and over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us this morning and contributing to this important supply chain study. It was mentioned that we've become a globally trusted trading partner when it comes to the canola industry, and kudos to our canola industry for attaining that. Last year, we saw a 40% reduction in production. Typically, we average 40 bushels to the acre of canola. The industry has set a target to meet the demands of being a trusted trading partner of 52 bushels to the acre. With the reduction of fertilizer on the horizon, what does that mean to your industry as far as meeting those demands?
Maybe I'll kick things off and ask my colleagues to jump in. So my first comment would be that I hope we're not going to see a reduction in fertilizer. I think we need to make a distinction between emissions and actual fertilizer use. And so how do we work on that in the right way? But I would just highlight that, as you pointed out, nitrogen fertility is extremely important. It's the second most important external factor after moisture to canola production. So I think there's work that can be done, as I've alluded to, on the emissions front. And as I made in my opening comments, remarks about our innovation strategy and increased focus on performance, precision, and the like. We've got some tools to work with through precision agriculture, through things like 4R practices and the like, to continue to encourage the uptake around those, as well as precision ag hardware and software. But we are going to continue to need fertilizer and fertility to support that yield intensification that you're alluding to, so that we continue to produce more canola, but on more or less the existing land base that we've got. So that's what we're going to look to do, and do it obviously in terms of sustainable intensification.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I'd add is we need to look at it holistically, right? Reducing emissions from fertilizer is one thing. Reducing fertilizer used on farm is another. As Chris said, nitrogen is a key tool in yield. And so I think it's also important to look at it holistically, is that 70% of all field crops storage of carbon is actually through canola. So canola stores 70% of the carbon stored by field crops. The deep root system, very good at storing carbon. Reducing a key fertility tool like nitrogen would actually impact the amount of carbon being stored, while also the economic ramifications for farmers in the value chain. So we need a holistic approach to these conversations. Can't be held one off and then try to marry that together on top of agriculture and agri-food Canada wanting to reach $75 billion in exports. We need a holistic approach that looks at all the moving pieces, Mr. Falk.
Okay, thank you. Could you tell me, you indicated the average canola product moves about 1,500 kilometers to market. Can you tell me the difference between what rail costs versus trucking costs would be for that distance?
Sure, I can take a stab at that. So really, when we think about Western Canadian production, we usually, not having specific numbers in front of me to share with you, but typically you look at trucks being price competitive for within a couple hundred kilometers of a delivery point. So maybe 200, 250 kilometers, whereas the rail is really the, it's measured in a fraction of what the trucking would be. So, I mean, there's really no alternative to the rail as far as just the volumes, but then also the price at which the railways can move the bulk grain. I mean, there's just nothing that can compare to that. So trucking was usually, we see that as regional, and then the no one does it better than the railways for the long haul.
And so, having said that, is are rail companies committed to a certain volume to market every year? Have they met those commitments?
Well, certainly one of the coming out of the shadows of Bill C-49, the Transportation Modernization Act, there is now kind of a bolstered communication between the railways and their grain shippers. And certainly, though, the railways consult, they put on paper with their plans to the Minister of Transport every year their idea of what they're going to move for that year and the size of the actual crop to be hauled. But there's nothing that holds them to that. So what we've seen this year was, we are going to do X, but in reality, Y has happened. And there's no, there is some accountability within the contractual arrangements, but it's not to the level of the grain shippers and grain industry would like to see.
Okay, and do you know if some of the disparity in the amount of shipments that you had wanted and needed as an industry was due to being offset by fuel being hauled or crude oil?
There's always that dynamic tension. Certainly this year, we'd look at it and say the first 16 weeks of crop year, both railways were doing wonderful. It's been that recovery has been choppy and slow post flooding. And then also there are commercial and operational decisions being made within the railways that affect that, because at the end of the day, the bottom line is their operating ratio and shareholder value. And there are certain things that they do within their company that can have an effect on the amount of grain or any other product moved on the common railway system.
Thank you, Mr. Pratt. Thank you,
thank
Mr.
you.
Falk. We're going to now move to Ms. Valdez for 5 minutes. Over to you.
Good afternoon, colleagues, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses who are here today. So the question that I have is for Mr. Davison, and Mr. Pratt and Mr. Carey, feel free to jump in if you would like to answer as well. So now that the Fraser Grain Terminal is operational, what opportunities are available for the canola industry?
I'm actually, if it's all right, Steve, going to defer to you on that as it relates to the terminal specifically. Happy to come in on some other comments regarding canola generally and some of the comments we made earlier in terms of the opportunities for growth going forward. But if there may be a specific transportation link to that question, Steve, I don't know if you want to comment or not.
Yeah, just very briefly. I mean, I think what we've seen, the long game and the bet, if you will, from the participants in the grain sector, the buyers and the exporters, when you see something like a Fraser Grain Terminal come online, that's another investment. That's another long bet on the industry and our ability for growth and profitability through the whole supply chain to the benefit of everybody and the economy. So certainly, we're getting towards the end of available land in Vancouver in general, as we discussed earlier. So the ability for that party to make investment, again, another outlet and another buyer out there in the marketplace. So seen as generally a good thing.
My maybe just a quick build, picking up on what Steve said there. As I said off the top, our biggest challenge is as an industry is meeting demand. So anything that we can do in terms of supply chain infrastructure, that's going to help facilitate that, whether that's to support obviously domestic movement in domestic markets or international markets, is something that's extremely welcome to us. And we've seen significant investments such as the one you've alluded to by our members and others in that space. We also have indications, as I commented in my opening remarks, in the last 12 months or so, of significantly expanded crush and processing capacity in terms of announcements that have been made linked to signals around the biofuels market. And so we want to make sure that those announcements are converted to shovels in the ground so that we continue to do a good job in meeting the demand that we're seeing both offshore and here in North America.
Yeah, I'm excited for the growth that the canola business will experience. I know in my business I've used many a canola jugs, so I appreciate your work there. In terms of do you have any projections as far as how any volumes or projections of how this terminal opening will increase in terms of sales?
I won't speak to the terminal specifically unless my colleagues have that. What I will tell is the general announcements that I just referred to of the I guess it's about 5 facilities will actually increase our capacity by 50% if they all come to fruition over the period of time from when shovels are in the ground till we have new operational facilities up and running. So significant increase in capacity.
Thank you. And in the canola supply chain, are there any issue or cause for concern, or where are the specific bottlenecks, if you want to just narrow in on those?
Ooh, that's a broad question. I think there's a few things that we would point out. So on the one front, I commented on regulation off the top, and regulation is key, obviously. And so if we have regulation that's enabling, that's very positive. But if we have regulation that's acting as a barrier to innovation and access to technology, that has an impact on the entire value chain. So, and when I speak of that, I refer to both domestically and internationally. Internationally, if we have diverging regulatory frameworks in different key markets, that has the potential to create significant market access challenge, which if they come to fruition, work backwards through our supply chain and ultimately inhibit or restrict markets for canola farmers and the rest of the value chain. So That really links to the fact that reliable access to markets is critical, given what both Dave and I said off the top, that 90% of our canola production today is exported. So we need a positive trade environment that's free of tariff and non-tariff barriers. So we have a plan to do that. We work with you and others, government and industry stakeholders, to achieve that through a number of different levers. But it's critically important.
Thank you. And just like a quick question more around like shipping. If things were shipped in bulk, does that really reduce supply chain disruptions?
Steve, you want to comment?
Well, I mean, we currently do operate what we kind of typically refer to as a bulk system, right? Where it's literally, the rail cars are being loaded and they're going, many different trains are meeting the same ship and filling it. So really when it comes down to the bulk system, we really don't have any other, on the immediate horizon or long-term horizon, there's no other way to do this for the bulk grain system in Western Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Pratt. Thank you, Ms. Valdez. Monsieur Perron, 2 minutes 30 secondes.
Oui,
s'il vous plaît.
merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Mr. Thériault, what Ms. Wright mentioned earlier for the support for, like truck drivers, for example, is that what you were referring to when you're thinking of facilitating training for the sector? Is that a good example of a small measure which could perhaps assist in a large effect? Well, it would be a hand up. It would help. I was looking at a more comprehensive way. I mean, there was jurisdictional issues there, but in general, the agri-food sector has to be highlighted. Okay, temporary foreign workers. Some groups provided us a plan, a strategy to put things into place more quickly. We should perhaps facilitate the entry of these workers here to take the stress off the shortage that we have here. Well, given the system that we have built ourselves, we depend a lot on temporary foreign workers. We must facilitate their access, their egress, and not be restricted to one employer when they get to Canada. Thank you. Mr. Carey, you mentioned in your introductory remarks that we should perhaps have a rail network that was dependable. Do you have any recommendations, specific recommendations to make to the committee on that score? Concrete steps that might be taken?
I do think one thing from the shipper's perspective is we do need to see more accountability in the railway-shipper relationship. This has tried to be tackled in multiple legislative occurrences over the last few years, but certainly there's, to one of the earlier questions, shippers order rail cars under a commercial system. And there's no accountability when those aren't delivered.
Pour la congestion dans les ports,
port congestion now. A preceding witness spoke to us of the eventuality of perhaps removing the Competition Act restrictions on container ships. Do you think that might be a possible contribution to soften the overload in the ports? I'm sorry, but I think Mr. McGregor will give you just
that question. Finish up.
Sure, I'll allow a quick finishing of the answer to that.
Yes, we'll allow for an answer to that.
If you want to continue with a question answering that?
Sure, I guess I can just jump in 10 seconds that certainly...
Oui, 10 secondes, je peux ajouter qu'il y a plusieurs secteurs agricoles qui appuient ce que vous avez discuté là, sur cette oligopolie des wagons. Il y a peut-être un rôle pour le gouvernement de viser un peu la loi sur la concurrence pour voir si on peut assouplir un peu cette exonération. Bon, à propos de la loi sur le transport, la loi canadienne du transport, et la question de responsabilité que vous avez mentionnée, est-ce qu'on va continuer à modifier la loi ou devrait-on tout simplement avoir une autorité réglementaire plus costaud?
So I'm going to talk in English and hope that Monsieur Perron can hear me. Okay, we're good. Back to you.
Okay, so I'll just repeat the question just on the accountability piece that you mentioned. Do we best fit that in through amendments to existing legislation, or do we find room through regulatory authority under existing legislation? I'm just wondering how we can best enforce that accountability aspect.
Sure. Very briefly, that is a quest from grain shippers and other sector shippers for decades. We've inched towards it through various pieces of legislation and acts over the time, and bills rather over the time. I think that, again, not being a lawyer, there's aspects there that have never, there's been a threshold that's never been crossed in the verbiage within the act to allow what we refer to as a true kind of reciprocal relationship.
Great. Mr. Chair, I think I'll end there. So thank you to our witnesses.
You're a gentleman. Thank you for helping. Look, colleagues, we were about 15 minutes delayed on the first panel. I'm going to use my discretion to give the Conservatives 2.5 minutes, and then to Ms. Taylor-Roy, who I know is the only one hasn't had the chance to get questions. So to Mr. Barlow for 2.5, then to Ms. Taylor-Roy, and we'll finish up.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and great testimony from our witnesses. And we've talked about the Transportation Act review, and I think that's something that I'd like to touch on a little bit more as well. But specifically with how the United States has handled this recent supply chain issues, appointing a supply chain czar, putting in very punitive fines, and we've seen the result of that, where shipping lanes have now been diverted from Canada to the United States. We've asked for an investigation of the Transportation Act on shipping containers and supply chains. Are there some? Should we be following the U.S. lead here and implementing some of these very strong changes? Has the government been in touch with you on why they have not initiated the investigation under the Transportation Act?
I can start just at a high level, Mr. Barlow, that I think it's really impressive to see what the United States does when it decides there's a supply chain issue. They move mountains to make sure that they continue to trade. At a more granular level, I might ask my colleague Steve, but I think we have not been contacted by the government regarding kind of high-level transportation issues, with the exception of the recent transportation summit. But Steve?
One of the 2015 recommendations was to establish under the leadership of the Minister of Transport and International Trade, a advisory panel long-term that advises on a variety of issues. And one could imagine that a transportation commissioner, as was discussed at the previous commission, could potentially be something like using a vehicle like that and having that person as a chair, again, with a long view, tackle these issues in an actual tangible way and discuss them, and then also that plan of attack.
One last quick question. When Conservatives were in government, we had the value chain roundtable. So you had this always being discussed, and you had a group that was overseeing this, and that has been eliminated and split into a bunch of other small groups. Have you seen, has that had an impact by not having either, we've talked about a commissioner or even a minister that is in charge of looking at this specifically and is able to enact maybe some of those recommendations quickly and being more agile than we have been now? Have you seen a change in our ability to adjust and react?
I think there's been some growing pains with the revamping of the value chain roundtable sort of approach. I would say that, like the previous panels, we like to be permissive as opposed to prescriptive,
Mr.
but we
Carey,
have seen value.
I apologize. We'll have to keep it there. Finally, to Ms. Taylor-Roy for 2.5, and then we'll finish up.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And I just want to say thank you to all the witnesses for being here. It's been incredibly interesting panels today, and I wish I had more than 2.5 minutes to ask questions. But given that I do not, I would like to direct my question to Monsieur Thériault. And I've noticed a couple times when you were speaking that you've referred to or said, given the system we have put in place or given the system we have built. And you also referred to the fact that you felt the government should do more in terms of education. From hearing all of the testimony, it seems both consumers and perhaps the workforce in terms of agriculture. Could you just comment specifically if you have any recommendations for our study on what role the government could play in addressing some of these, understanding the components of agriculture and consumption, and how we can better educate people around this?
That's a big loaded question for such a amount of time to answer. Actually, what I think that we should promote is the science that is in agriculture. I think a lot of things we hear, we see is strictly based on beliefs, and reinforcing the fact that agriculture is a science and that science-based agriculture is, I think, the way that will allow us to keep farming under all those climate change problems that we have. Fertilizer prices going up can in part be solved with more precision agriculture. So spot applications and aspects like that, we never talk about really out in the open. I mean, people in the agri-food sector hear about it, but out in the open, it's not being discussed. And I think that there's some attraction aspect to it to make people understand all that technology can be applied to feed ourselves.
Thank you. Yeah. Earlier, one of the witnesses earlier talked about agriculture 2.0, and when you look at any investment sites on different industries, agriculture is often shouted out as one of the least advanced, with only perhaps construction behind it. And so I think that's very important, the science behind it. But how do we make those switches? Because we were talking about, for example, earlier, the supply chain implications of
Miss Taylor-Roy, I apologize. 2.5 minutes is a short time, but we were happy to get you in on the record for that question. Thank you, Mr. Theriault. Colleagues, thank you for your patience on our technical issues today. To our witnesses, thank you for your testimony and all that you provide to the sector. And to our translators, we know that there was a challenge here today. Thank you for all your work. We're going to adjourn, and we will see you back on Thursday. Thank you so much.